We are Melungeon. We are Melungeon.
All right. Hello and welcome everyone to episode 7 of season 6 of the Melungeon Voices podcast. We have with us today Dr. Crystal Cavalier-Keck. Crystal is the citizen of the Occaneechi Band of the Saponi Nation and is the co-founder of the nonprofit organization 7 Directions of Service, in which we'll learn more about later in the interview. We will also be discussing the contributions of Indigenous peoples during the American Revolution, specifically the Occaneechi Saponi people. I, as always, am your host, Heather Angelina, and I am here today with my co-host, Brooke Gibbons. How are you,
Hello.
Brooke?
I'm good, good. It's beautiful weather outside,
It
finally.
is. And I will also say, when you were on the last episode, we did have some viewers and listeners reach out and just wanted to see how you were doing.
Oh, yeah. So I was in the middle of my art residency. I had a 6-week art residency here at a nonprofit arts organization called Goodyear Arts in Charlotte. I was awarded a wonderful 6 weeks where I was able to make lots of art. So I was in the thick of all that. But it is all done now, and I've completed it, and I'm ready to start the rest of my year.
Awesome. And where can people they can see it I think to the end of the month, right?
Yes, it is up here in Charlotte at Goodyear Arts, and it is up until April 25th. And also, I guess, online on their website, goodyeararts.org.
Fantastic. Thank you, Brooke.
Yeah.
All right. So let's see here. So, Crystal, for our viewers and listeners, tell us a little bit about your personal family ancestry and a little bit about yourself.
Okay, Mikudamen Kiyohe, Nahom say, Mima Crystal, Mima Okanichi Saponi, Mima Mebin Watiwa. So thank you so much for having me today. So just a little bit about me. Um, my name is Crystal Cavalier, and I grew up here in Alamance County. This is where I was born, right here in Alamance County. Right now, I'm currently on the lands that my grandfather built his house on. Um, it's been in our family for over 200 years, and it's in this little town called Pleasant Grove. It's unincorporated, but that is where most of our community just kind of resided since the middle to late 1700s. And, our people, stopped migrating back and forth between Virginia and South Carolina, and we just kind of landed here. My grandparents were teachers and farmers, and it was kind of a legacy. So I guess you could say, like, on my grandfather's side was more of the teachers, and then on my grandmother's side was more of the farming, where we grew sweet potatoes. So yeah, that's just a little bit about me, an overview. But I am a citizen of the Occaneechi Band of the Saponi Nation, proud member. I have a lot of mixed ancestry. I have Nasmon family, that the Parker side, and then so that's Algonquian, and then I have a Tuscarora grandmother, the Chavis, that kind of married into the Occaneechi community. I also have Scottish and Irish, but I also have African American, and I am proud of all of my ancestry.
It's awesome. So, Crystal, can you share with us the general history of the Occaneechi Saponi people?
Yeah, so the stories are we migrated from the mid-Ohio region down into Virginia. We were chasing after buffalo, right? And it kind of lines up with some of the older stories that we've heard from some Lakota and Dakota elders. Um, and really when colonization or first contact happens is when our story starts. Just imagine, ships coming into the coast, and they were first met by Algonquians, but you have to remember we were in the Piedmont of Virginia and North Carolina because there was no boundary. So, we would travel back and forth. One of the big things that I'm working on now is our trades path and, trying to protect our fishing villages along the rivers. And, you know, again, talking about place and being there, I really wanted to understand what my ancestors were going through. I kind of understand it now. Now that I've wrapped my mind around how things are trying to get destroyed and we're just moving forward. Um, but, we were in between Fort Christana around the early 1700s. You know, I guess you could say about 150 years, we've had a lot of colonization that came over from England right here on this coast. And, they were mixing or, having political relationships with the indigenous people. But then, over time, some of our people married each other, like the colonizers and the indigenous people. But then, they wanted to, I guess, spread westward. Right around the 1700s, Governor Spotswood was just like, we're gonna group all these people together because, we had died out from disease and a lot of, been murdered. They put us on the reservation at Fort Christana and, they merged a lot of different tribes with a similar dialect, but not speaking the same language into one. So whether you were, I don't know, Monacan, Saponi, Tutelo, our people, the Occaneechi, the Eno, they kind of merged us in and we all became Saponi, right? And then over time, families were dispersed, absorbed into other communities, pushed further from our original homelands that we had lived there for, 300 years. Um, and then, as wars started to happen and as tensions was happening between, many indigenous nations pushing back, we got rolled into the Tuscarora Wars. We met explorers like John Lederer, John Lawson, um, I can't remember, oh, Richard Staunton or Staunton. He came through Hillsborough. And so looking back at these journals, and listening to like Ned Bearskin, how list or reading the interpretation of through a white man's eyes of how listening to Ned Bearskin kind of gives us back a little bit of our cosmologies and what we believe in the stories that we had. So yeah, that's just a little bit about how we are, how we got to this place. Right before the formation of the United States. So, we're celebrating this 250 years of, America, the American Revolution. But, our Occaneechi people were no longer a centralized political power because we had got destabilized by Bacon, Nathaniel Bacon. He came and tricked us and wanted to control and dominate the trade of the deer skin and, whatever other trade that we had. And so he kind of almost annihilated our people to where we were run off of our island in the Roanoke River. We had one of the three islands was for Occaneechis. You know, we had to disperse and we had to really survive. And so, that's going to different communities along the Eno, the Sissipaha, the Sar people, the Shakori people. These were our, distant relatives and we, had trades with them. And so we had to band together for survival.
Oh, wow. And you mentioned Fort Christina. I had last month I had went to Virginia Beach, and on the way there, I finally was able. I stopped and saw the historical site, and I'm so glad that they finally have that they put up historical markers and they were talking about it, because that's it's such a crucial part of history that has been like I think that's only been very recently, like when doing the historical mark and everything and marking the site of
Mhm.
Fort Christina. And it was amazing. Like, I'm so glad that they're finally acknowledging that.
Yeah,
Yeah. And
I
then,
am too. Yeah.
and then you were just getting a little bit into the American Revolution. I was going to ask, like, was there, what significant role did the Occaneechi, Saponi people or indigenous peoples play during the American Revolution?
So I will say that in some of our research and looking back at the records, like the census records and, whatever documentation we could find, some of our relatives, more relatives, were involved in the American Revolution War than the Civil War. We had a lot of pensions, pension records. William Guy comes to mind. That's one of the family lines I've been studying. One of Fanny Guy is one of my fifth great grandparents, great grandmothers. But I've been working on the lynching of Cyrus Guy, and he's part of the Guy family, and he was lynched right after the Civil War. But going back to William Guy, before he moved down here to North Carolina, he was in Virginia, and he had a pension, and his widow was collecting the pension from the war. But after the Revolutionary War, the political alliances changed. And, I went to school at the University of Oklahoma, and I got involved in the Indigenous Peoples Law program to really understand federal law. And it really helped me understand learning about the federal Indian law and how it was started after the formation of the United States, and, all of these law cases that led to the removal of Indigenous people on the East Coast, marched on the Trail of Tears out west. It really kind of helped me understand, how our people were identifying, how we were erased. Instead of us living in like a great big, community, we were living in smaller, more dispersed communities across the Piedmont. So really trying to do these different spots for survival. And I really think it's important to say that, some of our people went north, they were adopted in by the Cayuga. Some of our people went south, they were adopted in by the Catawba. But we still had to reside within this colonial society, but we still maintain our kinship ties of who we are, our identity. We remained, in our community, and we were still doing our cultural practices, often in secret though. But it was pretty dangerous if you sit back and think about it. There was really no clear ally because the Britain and even the Americans, they had a history of exploiting our people, whether for gain or money or, women. But then you have to think about this. It was all about the control of the land. Um, as the settlers pushed westward, during and after this war, a lot of our land got lost. It got accelerated. We saw white men marrying indigenous women for the control of the land. They knew that's how land was controlled. We had to force, some natives align with the British, some natives align with the Americans, for survival, right? And so we had to, try to do the best that we can in these hostile situations. Um, and the Occaneechi, we were a powerful nation at once, but then, Bacon's rebellion kind of, really ended that control. And really, it's about how we endured on the East Coast under this erasure because now they were like, oh, you have to conform to these standards or you have to dress this way. I wish I had this book. So there's this book, um, and it was written in the 1870s, right? And it was an elementary school book, and it talked about the five races of men. And then it talked about if you live in a hut or like a little anything that's not a brick house or a log house, that was considered savage. And so they looked at us as being savage because we had like thatched houses, thatched roofs. So they looked at us as being savage, uncivilized, dirty. And so I know that was a huge like identity issue, and it's still kind of an identity issue because my grandmother often said that she really didn't want to be considered dirty. She didn't want to be a dirty Indian. And now I'm just thinking like my grandmother was notorious for being like Clorox, everything was wiped down in Clorox. If you come in the house and you smell bleach, that's like smelling of clean. And now I'm just sitting here thinking about it, like, she just didn't want that image of being a dirty Indian. And it just really didn't bring us this freedom that I'm thinking that they thought would happen. Um, it just marked this expansion of the American way, right? Like the Revolutionary War just started it. And don't get me wrong, I'm kind of happy, I'm have living an American life because there's a lot of, well, I don't know, I take it back. There's a lot of things that I thought we were doing really good, but now after this whole political environment, I'm not quite sure it's what I think it is. But our people, we were misclassified in colonial records. We were kind of erased out of history. And we were essentially just like ignored and invisibilized. But our people remained in Orange County because Alamance it came out of Orange County around 1849. But we maintain our ties and we still had our kinship. But then, came in Christianity and they were, either you were a missionary or you were a teacher. And so they missionized and Christianized a lot of our people into saying that like this is the way, this is how you have to be. If you don't do this, your soul is, eternally damned. And that's kind of scary. I think back to a kid, always having the eyes, I always thought God was watching me. And I always felt like self-conscious because like there's this mystical being watching me. And so we adopted names of, people around us, and that is what became our family names. Somebody asked me if we could go back further than, the 1600s, and we can't because we were just very, oral people. So,
Sure, I can relate to that. I also have one of those ancestries where it's very oral, and it is so important to record that. You mentioned, you've been able to research all this, your direct ancestors going back several hundred years. Did you have any that actually participated in the American Revolution? And you can just talk more about, I just want to hear more about your research and your discovery and all that and that process.
yeah. So, I did. My Levi Jeffries he was my third or fourth great grandfather. He participated in it. And so that was the main one. There was a lot more Jeffries, a lot more. There was William Guy Jeffries, Parkers. They all participated in the Revolutionary War. So I guess you could say that my my great grandfathers, they were, they were warriors in the American sense of, warrior legacy, but um, they were just here to experience it. And what really got me started on the research was just the sense of identity because growing up, um, it was a lot of kids in the community like us, and didn't we really didn't identify with being Indian, but we really didn't identify with being black or white. It was more for if you could pass, right? And so you just wanted to make your life easy because, children in middle school and high school can be really nasty. I don't know if it's hormonal, but you just didn't want to be an outcast. You didn't want to be an outlier and you didn't want to get picked on. And so you just wanted to keep your head down. And so a lot of people just did that and they just, was like, okay, we're just going to go into the black race because it was safe, right? People were banding together. Our people always stated that they were free people of color, and I mean that is true. I have uncovered some things where I think that we may have slaves, but a lot of people like to just erase that. They don't want to talk about it, and I'm just like, man, you got to talk about it. But one instance was one of the white family members came and was telling me about my, great great grandfather, Freeman Hayes, and how he was with them, but he didn't say like how he got with them. And then I learned that in the 1830s, if your parents or if you were a single mom or if your dad didn't have a job, they wouldn't call you a slave. They would bound you out to a family. So you would be bound and you would be learning a trade. So that's how Freeman became a school teacher. And what I actually found out was Freeman Hayes had a little red schoolhouse. He had a deed, he had land, and most of that was, also something else too. All of our people had land. We had these great swaths of land, and he had a little red schoolhouse, and he would teach the kids in the community how to read and write. And it was crazy. One day, just last week, I was going to Roxborough to the land we have own in Virginia, and I just pulled up to this house and I said, I'm gonna just stop and see. And I stopped and was like, this house was my great great grandfather's, and was this ever a schoolhouse? And he was like, yeah, I went to that school up until like the 1950s. And so, it was still used as a school. And so they knew that. And then come to find out, I'm distantly related to them. They did serve in the war. And they got like their pension, and they were able to purchase land. And I worked with Mark Chilton, the Register of Deeds. He's the former Register of Deeds of Orange County. And he sent me this map that showed how much of the land that our ancestors had out here, but over time, families, heirs properties, just breaks up. And the what I've noticed is a lot of the descendants of, our ancestors, they didn't learn the value of land. And so land now is very, like, I mean, it's like almost like 50 or $60,000 an acre now. And people want to live out here now in the community because they know how nice it is out here. It's very quiet. But because they know it's very quiet, they are offering our community, who is, not that well off, but they're offering them, just say 30 grand for maybe 10 or 12 acres. And they're not really understanding that they're getting swindled by developers, and they're, losing this land. And now the land developers are coming in and selling off 1 acre lots when it used to be not that many houses out here. And now we're getting an influx of people living in the community. They're bringing not the values that we had. So you have a lot of outsiders coming into the community trying to obtain this, you know, piece of, heaven that they think they have, but it's really doing a lot of damage because now we have a lot of drugs coming in. We have a lot of transient beings. We've had a lot of people, like, we've had missing and murdered people. I mean, it's just like not really, I mean, it's just a lot of people moving in. I'm just like, oh, this is terrible. So it's kind of sad to see our community going down because there's no economic opportunities here. When NAFTA happened, the trade left, like all the mills left and went overseas. So that left most of our people not having a job because they went from farming to mill work to now they're going to have to scramble. They're going to have to educate themselves to, be able to provide for their families, or they're working 3 and 4 jobs. I mean, it's kind of hard. And so, I'm like, we're always got to have something in the community for people to do, like bring back some, farming, or bring back some type of economic revenue. So, trying to come full circle, again, we're just switching our narratives and still kind of living this loss of land. We have our political autonomy, but we're still, a state recognized tribe. But we still have this marginalization happening in our communities, and people are not understanding their connection to place or their connection to the land, because the further they get, colonized with this new technology, they're not understanding the value of like water and air, things that you
Uh,
need to live
yeah.
are being harmed because of this colonization and moving forward. And so, we're still trying to mitigate that, well, at least me and a couple of people in the community, but it's very difficult to it's very difficult to compete with a mini computer in your hand when you have like this versus like, go outside and play, you know?
Yes. Yes. And I'm glad so I want to go into that because I do want to talk more about your nonprofit that you co-founded with your husband, Jason,
Mhm.
Seven Directions of Service. What inspired you to create Seven Directions? And can you tell us more about its mission, particularly, of course, in regards to environmental justice?
Yes. So, Seven Directions of Service was actually founded after the Mountain Valley Southgate pipeline. We found out it was going to come through our territory of Alamance County, and it was only about 6 miles from where we live here in Alamance County. And I was like, I don't want this pipeline coming through. You know, this is terrible. I had just started to learn about what was missing murdered women. You know, what did that look like? Missing murdered Indigenous women. How did that entail? What did that look like for us here on the East Coast versus out West? And then just the destruction of water and land. And they were coming in and they were taking people's land and they were like, well, we're going to put a pipeline through your property and it's going to split it in half and you can't plant anything over this pipeline. And then you're living so close to a blast zone that if something happened, you could just die. And I mean, I don't think people understand that, but we did a water walk and I told my husband, I said, we better create a nonprofit because I was like, if something happens, if they sue Jason and Crystal, we don't have any money. But if they sue the nonprofit, they have to sue that entity. And then, that entity can go bankrupt. But, we can't go bankrupt because we would lose our house and, we would lose our livelihood. And then we'd have some like big debt that we just didn't have the money to do that. So that's really why we created it. But then it came in to play that we wanted to do it for, advocating for the justice of the environment, but also protection of our sacred sites, advocating for our indigenous communities across North Carolina and the broader Southeast because we were so invisibilized. We didn't even show up in any of the data. We didn't have any data about missing murdered women. We didn't have any data about the environmental injustice that was happening to us, like how many stillbirths did, our women have because they didn't classify us properly here in North Carolina. If you were in a database, the police either classified you as white, black, or Hispanic. Um, what I also noticed is we had such a disconnect from any of our sacred sites. The only thing that we had was Town Creek Indian Mound. But there was so many archaeological sites in North Carolina, so like Upper and Lower Saratown. We have the Frederick site and the Adashir site in Hillsborough. That was a fishing village. Very many villages that they found that the archaeologists excavated, and then they put those bones in the museums. Like that is still a connection to place for us. But because people have not desensitized themselves to that, um, they just really don't have a tie to it. And I'm just like, if you, again, you don't have a tie to place, then you really don't care what happens to it. And so, we've really tried to get people to understand that you really have to care about something, especially if you want to say like, okay, I'm indigenous, but what does that really mean? Like what does that mean to you? Like some people will say, "Oh, I just got a card." But what does that really mean? Like what does that card really give you? And then, some people are like, "Well, I don't want to be disenrolled." But I'm like, you really can't be disenrolled from a community. I mean, you could do something that's really terrible and they can like kick you out, but what does that mean to be disenrolled from a tribe? And so it had me thinking that there's a lot of people who were scared to stand up and speak out about all of these challenges that's happening because they were afraid that they were going to be kicked out for some reason, right? Like some monetary gain that they think that they're going to get. And I'm just like, that's not how that works. And I'm like, I'm always going to know who my ancestors are. You can't tell me I'm not Occaneechi. I got ancestors right over here in the ground. These are my people. I'm always going to be Occaneechi. I just might not be in your your nation. But why did you disenroll me? You know what I'm saying? Or why would you have disenrolled me? But it's a lot of that happening now across the United States. I see it as like an attack on traditional people. There is a
Yeah.
war against people who are trying to stand up for what's right and just. And so that is part of Seven Directions. We have seven different ways that we fight for women, men, children, elders, the earth, the water, and then, for ourselves, our own identity. And so, our work supports a lot of, our homelands and trying to keep those sites protected, as well as the burial sites. That Mountain Valley Pipeline was going to go through a lot of burial sites on top of the mountains in Virginia. And so, a lot of people, they just really didn't care. And I'm just like, somebody's got to care about your ancestors, like they might not be buried in a cemetery, but they were buried on the mountain that was spiritual to them at one time. So, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I love what you're saying about the just the connection to place and how important that is. What is the Land Back Initiative, since we are talking about place, and why is it important, especially to the Native peoples?
So the Land Back Initiative is just really about, I always like to talk about land rematriation, um, and how Indigenous people are able to kind of restore that relationship between Indigenous people and their ancestral lands, right? So reestablishing systems of care, governance, and responsibility, because colonization came in and they came in with this different thought process about how they think things should be governed or how things should be lived upon, and it really shaped our values. Like, I mean, they came in with a lot of shiny things and it distracted a lot of people. um and then, now we're here and we're going back into this way of how we need to get in this right relationship with the earth and the people, right? Restoring balance. It's not really about ownership, because some people will say, "Oh, it's just about ownership of the land," because I really do think a lot of people think that we're just going to come and take their land. And it's not really about ownership. It's about the right of indigenous nations for them to be able to govern their lands and their communities, but really returning the land to those generations of ecological knowledge. Because in some of those um, explorers' notes that they took, I mean, you really have to read it and process it, but it really has a little bit of ecological knowledge that talks about when we fished. So we fished in cycles. When we hunted in cycles. So we wouldn't overfish or overkill or, essentially wipe out a species, right? When we, harvested something from a field, we wouldn't go back for a year to that field or, 2 years to let it regenerate and grow. But then also, the land back movement is also about healing. We've got 534 years of healing that we have to do, because it's been harm that has been caused by displacement, extraction, and then erasure. There's a lot of indigenous people who are on lands that were not indigenous to them. They were forced there to that land. And so you're not, your ancestors are not from there originally. You have to get to know that land. It's all about just that reconnecting. So, like, I for the longest time I thought South Dakota was the home of the Lakota people, but over time I've learned that most of their lands were in Minnesota, right? So they have connection to that place. A lot of the Ojibwe migrated over, they were forced over, into the Minnesota region, Michigan, Wisconsin region. And a lot of things like that kind of disrupts us. And I know it sounds kind of silly, but when you just disrupt this one little piece or molecule of you, and it's not, it's just like bubbling, right? And so then it kind of sets off this system, this chain, and then it kind of leads to other, problems in your system, like whether your body is not regulated for something, or you're just not feeling comfortable in your skin, or things
Yeah.
like that. And I really do think that a lot of the things that is really happening, a lot of indigenous people are getting caught up in it. And we're getting caught up in the I guess the inertia of other people's wars, that we're being pulled into it. I've seen a lot of fights over protecting sacred places, burial grounds, and traditional practices. Um, yeah, yeah, that's what I think about that.
No, and I wanted to ask you, Crystal, because I know since we're talking, you had mentioned about the replica Occaneechi Saponi village that's there in Hillsborough, and that was I believe that was wiped out when that flood came through.
Yep.
Yes. And I'm wondering how is that coming along? Like I know they were talking about they're going to be rebuilding it, correct?
Yep. So, last July, or is a hurricane or tropical depression,
Mhm. Yeah.
Chantal came, and that hurricane system just kind of stalled out over the Piedmont. And we got so much rain within a short period of time that, everything overflowed. And the replica village, and I mean, I guess now the original village, it is really close to the, River. And so a lot of the water came into the village site, and the force of that uplifted all of the palisades and just took them out the ground, and then destroyed a lot of the atis, which is the word for house, and removed everything. And so we couldn't go into that village for at least 3 or 4 months because
Oh my
the
God.
city has like their sewer pipes. So they have these big manhole things that sits way above the river, but the river rose up above that. And so all of the sewer junk came out. And so it mixed with the river water and everything was contaminated. And so they couldn't go back in until all of that was, decontaminated. The bacterial, you know, stuff was gone because they didn't want people to get sick. And so they have put the Palisades back in. Today, I was supposed to be there, but because I had a well pump issue, I had to stay here for the plumber. That we had a village day. To where we were going to go and work. And then at the same time, Hillsborough is having the 250 American Revolution. And so a lot of our people are going to hear Lawrence speak at 4:30 to talk about the Occaneechi and their place in the Revolutionary War. He is our historian. And that's where I got most of my information was from him about by the time, how the Occaneechi got, where we were at the American Revolution, he did a lot of research about that. And I want to say, I think he has a book coming out pretty soon.
Oh, that's fantastic. Yeah, you have to let me know. Yeah, I would love to get it. And then I also wanted to say, is there any are there any recent projects right now that Seven Directions have been working on? And if you would like to share any of them?
Sure. So the one of the recent we have several projects. So one right now we're fighting against 3 pipelines in the state. We're in the phase of educating people because the major pipeline is actually going to go through the southeast and end up in Louisiana. So that's one of the projects we're working on is the pipelines. The second project we're working on is protecting sacred sites. So right now there is an attack on, several of our fishing villages along the Haw River, and these are documented sites with, some they left some of the burial items there, and really it's fighting against housing development, it's fighting against corporations, but also a little bit fighting against the government because, you know, um the state government, the archaeologists have these these records or these reports that they have written that some of these archaeological restoration firms go out and do like a what do you call it, a fossil test, or they go out and they're doing shovel tests to see if there is any indigenous or any American Indian burial sites. And I just got a document on Thursday that said this site should be recommended to the Register of National Place for Historic the Historic Registry. And back in October, from October until December, I was at the Chatham County Commissioner meeting every month fighting against a housing development called Riverbend or the Bluffs. I can't remember which one it was. At first it was the Bluffs and now it's Riverbend. But they want to sell these lots. And our fishing village, because again, these archaeologists say the most egregious things like, oh, they abandoned their village. No, we abandoning it because you would murder us if we lived that way. Just, tell the truth in these reports. Like, just tell the truth. So we were forced out of the way we hunt and fish. We had to acculturate into a dominant society to survive for the next 7 generations. And now our places are being built upon because somebody wants to have a river view. They don't want to have river view for everybody. They just want to own a piece of the water. And I just think that is the most stupidest thing I ever seen in my life because as indigenous people, we we read the signs. So when birds fly out or when the winds get up or we're like, it's time to pack up and leave this fishing village because it is not safe here. The river rises, right? A lot of people listen to the signs and they would move up ground, right? So,
Mhm.
you know, trying to tell people like, don't build on a barrier island or don't build in a wetland or don't build at the river because 9 times out of 10, you're going to get flooded out. And we try to tell these people that, but now we're fighting back and I mean we don't have a lot of money and it takes a lot of money to get an lawyer to go to court. Then you got to even get a lawyer who wants to, maybe not win because you're fighting the government, you're not going to win.
Mhm.
Or you're fighting against billion-dollar corporations who just want to build a house at a light speed and they're going to sell you some crap $1 million house that they threw together in a month and it's not built to withstand time and nature. And so now these people are wasting their money, they're wasting their time because I'm telling you the materials that they're using are cheap. And it's just I don't know, it's just I don't even know what to do. Sometimes I'm like I don't know what to do. I want to go to law school, but man, I do not want to go back to school. I just don't think I could learn any more knowledge in my brain because I think I might explode. But there's got to be some people out here that can just kind of get this unbalanced cycle back on balance. So that's another project. And then the final thing that we're doing is we're working about the rights of nature, rights of the river. So trying to give nature a voice or an opinion. So some guardian of this nature could take these corporations to court. Because that's the only way people are going to be able to save themselves and save humanity is if something stands up, right, and fights back. But again, we have a lot of corporations that pour billions of dollars into just like dismantling, small people for their gain. Like right now, we have a lawsuit against a city for approving a zoning package because they now are allowing this mega $1 million housing development to come in. And now the housing development is asking for like all of this discovery information, which is kind of silly, like, but they want to know the members' addresses so they can intimidate people. They want to look into our finances of who funds us so they can, try to disrupt that because that's what they want to do is disrupt anything that stands in their way and they just want to steamroll over that. And I just look back at when did our society go from being about the people to being about a corporation? And I don't think some people understand that this is what's happening to them because it's so much chaos that is overwhelming everybody that they just don't have the systems internally to just be like, I can't handle this. I think I was listening to a podcast that said we're only supposed to interact with, maybe 500 or 600 people. Anything over that, like social media, overwhelms our system to where we have this no empathy or anything like that because we're dealing with so many people when our bodies are only supposed to deal with a few hundred people. That's how a community exists. Um, And that is how our indigenous communities existed, right? We had alliances with other nations who lived maybe right up the street, but we had our community of 200 people. That's how we had our clan system. We were able to intermarry with other tribes. And we were able to, ebb and flow between these communities and not overwhelm our system. And, I really don't know how to get people back to that thinking because don't get me wrong, I love air conditioning. But I kind of want to get back to our social values of, how do we be a community? Because um you could be sitting in your house hurting, suffering, dying of food, not having food, and your community will not even know that you need this because we don't talk to each other like we're supposed to be. We have developed a relationship with our phones or our computers that is replacing our own relationships, right?
Yeah.
And so we really have to say, okay, no, I'm putting this down because I value you. And so I've really, I mean, it's difficult, but I've really tried to really, when I'm going to dinner or when I'm with my family, I put my phone away so I can just try to focus on what's presently happening with this other person because I want them to know that I value them. And so, again, those are the things that we're trying to push out, but it seems like everything else is just like clouding our judgment, and so it's overwhelming. So yeah.
So it's what's so wild about everything you're saying is that it's I hear these stories in so many other indigenous communities, and it's so wild that it's like it's happening across the board, what is happening in your community. And it's like, oh my God, we need to do something. It has been so amazing hearing you speak today about all the things. Is there anything else you'd like to share with our listeners and viewers?
Um, well, other than that, um, I just think that many people should just really start coming together. Like, I know COVID made it really easy for us to do virtual stuff, but I really think we should go back to being in person. You can't you just can't replace human interaction, and we are animals that thrive on interaction. Like, we are just not supposed to be alone. And when you get this technology going forward, you're replacing a real relationship with something that's not really real, and can be really dangerous because AI can tell you to do some things that it doesn't have empathy or feelings. Like, it's just calculations, and you can give you a wrong calculation. You can't replace humans for that. So I really do think that we need to get back to reconnecting, and it's okay to just say no or being like, okay, I'm overwhelmed. I have hit my 200 people limit. I can't do that anymore. And just be okay with it because this information technology is good, but it's also bad, and we've got to learn to be able to pull the bad things out and say, okay, that's just way too much, like information overload, because that really starts to stress you out. Like, the one thing I'll say, don't doom scroll, you know, don't doom scroll. That just messes you up.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. You gotta step back from it, like you gotta know what's going on, but you gotta, yeah, like you can't be
Yeah.
just like all the bad stuff, yeah. It's
Yep.
it's very negative. Yeah. But I wanted to mention Brooke, because we were talking about so I know I remember you were telling me about on Guam, your Chamorro ancestors I can't remember, it was something about their graves. They were going to be dug, like was it the US
Yes.
military or something? Was okay.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. So there's a lot of militarization going on because it's a US territory, and they have gone in and done their own studies. Much like Crystal said, these archaeologists are saying one thing.
Mhm.
The people, the indigenous folks are saying quite another. The US will go in and say, no, it's fine. You can build some more military complexes here. The indigenous people are like, no, we literally have ancestral remains. And then the military will end up finding these remains, and now, so we've got like maybe 1,000 or so remains in the Guam Museum. Also, speaking of that, over randomly in the Natural History Museum in New York, we just rematriated four remains of our ancestors, and that was a huge deal to get them back to Guam, get them back to their homeland.
Oh,
I love that.
wow.
That's
Yeah,
beautiful.
yeah. And it was like, and we had a whole ceremony. A lot of people from Guam, a lot of people that fought for this, they went up to New York and had a whole ceremony. They fought for it, and they had a very special ceremony back in Guam as well when they returned. And yeah, it was a big deal. So, uh,
That's
and like I said,
awesome.
like I was telling Crystal, I'm like, this is happening everywhere. It's so crazy. Like, what can we do?
Yeah.
We need to stop this. Like,
Yeah.
Yeah,
it's not just
Yeah.
one indigenous community. It's so many that this is
yeah.
going on with.
Yeah. 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 That's
Mhm.
why I love what you're doing, Crystal, with Seven Directions of Service. It is so needed. And I want
Yes.
our viewers and listeners to know, like we will, so like the website for Seven Directions of Service and more information on it, we will have on our website. And
Okay.
we'll put that link like in the notes of the episode. So people can know, so they'll be able to go straight there and learn more.
Okay, that's perfect. Oh, thank you so much. I
Oh,
appreciate it.
awesome.
I
Well,
appreciate
Crystal,
it.
it has been an absolute pleasure having you on our podcast, and thank you so much. And then next month we will be interviewing Dr. Matthew Croston. He has a Melungeon ancestor who fought alongside General George Washington at the Valley
Oh,
of at Valley Forge. So we'll be hearing from him next month. We also want to thank the VA 250 Commission and the Virginia Humanities for the grant that made this podcast season possible. Thank you again, Crystal, and thank you, Brooke. We'll see everyone next month.
bye.
Bye.
Now we've traveled very far. Where we've been is who we are. We are standing proud and strong. We'll use our strength to carry on. We are Melungeon. We are Melungeon. Our voices shouting our stories of our defeats and victories. We're unified, we stand as one. Diversified nation that is finally home. We are